Big tech may have followed their conscience this past week, but it certainly came at a cost. And as a Biden administration prepares to take office, what changes can we expect in the business sector? Plus, that cup of coffee may have just gotten a little bit more expensive considering AOC and Elizabeth Warren want you to pay for your barista's fine arts degree. These topics plus our one-on-one with Governor Christie today on the BizPo Show. Welcome to the BizPo Show, a place where business and politics collide in a way that we hope is both enlightening and entertaining. I'm Seth Denson, coming to you from Dallas, Texas, and I'm joined by Dan Geltrude in New York. Dan, good to see you, buddy.
Hey, Seth. So excited for today's show. It's going to be tremendous with Christie, and I got to ask you a little quiz here. What state is he from, Seth?
Maybe from up in New Jersey where you are, but buddy, right back at you. What football team is he a fan of?
Well, let me say this. I never said that Christie was perfect. He was a heck of a governor, if you ask me. But as far as his preferences for football, well, that's another matter.
For those of you that don't know, by the way, Christie is a known Dallas Cowboys fan. So, but I agree with you. He was a phenomenal governor, and he's certainly been a great advocate in and around the media the last number of years. So I'm excited to get his take on kind of the insanity that's been plaguing our politics in our nation over the last couple of weeks. How are things up there in your neck of the woods, buddy?
You know, Seth, you never thought we would get to this point. I think where we are here in the Northeast, it's no different from anywhere else in the country. There's literally shock about what's happening. And to me, this is not an issue of the right or the left. It's an issue of we have become so divided that we see ourselves as the enemy. And that's really not the place that we should be as a nation. Why do we have to look at our differences when there's so much that we have going for ourselves? I mean, would any of these people rather live in another country? If so, they're free to leave, right? So why stay?
Well, yeah.
It's because we have a great country.
That's exactly right. And certainly something that I think we'll talk about, not just in this episode of the BizPo Show, but as we proceed in future episodes, is kind of not only that which divides us, but hopefully more of that which can unite us. And you know, the purpose of our show is to talk about not just politics, but how the business climate intersects. And I think a lot of times when people hear about business, they think about the stock market, right? And as we all know, stock market's done quite well, still doing quite well, but not the entire business sector is doing well. Small businesses are still hurting. Many Americans across our country are still hurting. The world is still hurting. So as we start to dissect various topics on the show, I'm excited to get your straight talk. Nobody better than America's accountant to give it, to tell us like it is. And hopefully my Texas way of straight shooting, well, that'll be something people enjoy to hear as well.
I'm sure they will. Again, you talk a little funny, but that's just part of who you are, Seth.
Hey, man, I talk just like my mom and daddy talk. So, you know, and I know they're listening, so hopefully they'll enjoy it. But, well, listen, let's kick it off. This past week, from a business perspective, we saw a lot of things happening. We saw big tech come together in what seems to be an attack on the First Amendment. But moreover, an attack on their share price, with giants like Amazon, Google, Twitter, Facebook losing a combined $150 billion in market cap. You know, but Dan, listen, businesses dipping their toe into the political sphere, that's nothing new. I mean, for years we've seen Ben & Jerry's do it. You know, Nike recently did it in their support of people like Colin Kaepernick. You know, Goya Foods, who came out in support of the Trump administration, did quite well. As a matter of fact, I think they've even made AOC their employee of the month after she called for their boycott because they posted one of their greatest profits ever. And anybody who's been to a Chick-fil-A, I don't know if they have those up in New Jersey, but they certainly have those in the South. You're going to be in line for a while before you get a chicken sandwich. So politics always isn't the nail in the coffin for business, but this week, specifically for big tech, it does seem to be a hindrance. What say you?
Well, big tech has really dove in headfirst to the political world, and this is what we do on the BizPo Show. I mean, this is the perfect topic. But I want to go back to something in 1990, and I'm going to refer to Michael Jordan. I'm going to paraphrase here, and he made a statement back then that said, Republicans buy sneakers too, right? Of course, with Nike. But let me put that into context and what he was talking about. In North Carolina at the time, there was a Democratic candidate named Harvey Gantt. He was African American, and he was running against Jesse Helms, who was the Republican, but he was also a renowned racist. And they were really trying to get Michael Jordan involved with that campaign, obviously from being from North Carolina. And he refused to get directly involved. Now, his mom was involved with the campaign. She did a PSA, and Michael Jordan did make contributions, but he refused to get involved. And that famous comment about Republicans buy sneakers too is very insightful. He took a lot of heat for that, but he understood by getting involved in this campaign that he would be isolating half the people. Why hurt business? And I think it was a smart move on his part at that time.
Well, and I think the difference from a lot of these companies, like you mentioned Nike, but even Goya Foods and Chick-fil-A and some of these other organizations, they have goods and services. What are Twitter and Facebook's goods and services? We are. Their primary way of generating revenue comes from two things. It comes from ad buys, and it comes from mining data and selling that data, right? The information on their users. And so when you alienate 80 million people that are part of the nation with the greatest economic output, and I think Donald Trump's account was, I think, the 5th largest account in the entire Twitter platform. You're doing damage to your brand from a perspective of, where you get your revenue. And I think that's what shareholders don't have a political agenda. They have a pocketbook agenda, right?
Right.
And so I think what we saw this week were these, investors who removed themselves from the politics and the noise and said, wait a minute, you're now going to have a difficult time mining data on millions of people because you're throwing them off your platforms. And these same people probably are going to think twice about clicking on ads. And so as big business looks to the political sphere, maybe this is something that they need to pay attention to?
Well, of course, I don't agree with what big tech was doing related to banning Donald Trump and his tweets and so on. I think they're applying a very inconsistent standard, and I think that, by the way, I think that's a great topic for us to get into with Governor Christie. But there is no doubt about the fact by these stands from a political standpoint that they're trying to take is hurting shareholder value. And by doing that, that is completely separate from whatever your political beliefs are. Look, Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, he may have some really, really strong feelings about Donald Trump that are, of course, negative. And that's fine. That's fine. However, do you want to alienate half of your customer base by taking such an extreme action? I think if you're a Twitter shareholder, you got to be a little bit upset about what's happening because it cost you dollars.
Yeah, I say it all the time, and I'm sure you do too. When you are investing, try to leave the emotion at the door. Right? You want to make sure that you're investing with sound judgment on the business principles and acumen of its leaders. And I think, as you just mentioned, Jack Dorsey certainly called into question his business acumen, all politics aside. But I think that investors are going to take a hard look, as other CEOs have had happen over the years, right? We've seen Elon Musk, for example, over many years of scrutiny of his personal actions, and investors kind of dip their toe and lean back and go, maybe, maybe not. Now, obviously, Elon Musk's brilliance has catapulted him past that scrutiny. But Jack Dorsey may be diving into some areas here that maybe investors are going to wonder, is this something we really want to back going forward, and is there a better place to put our money?
No question about it, Seth.
Well, listen, I'm excited. As you mentioned just a moment ago, we've talked about it now a couple times. Governor Christie is going to be joining us. He was one of the very first to come out after the last week's chaos and give his opinions on things. One thing we're never short of when we're talking to Governor Christie is his opinion. We'll get his take on everything that's going on, business, politics, and maybe even a little bit of football when we come back on the BizPo Show.
Welcome back to the BizPo Show, and we are so excited to have Governor Chris Christie as our guest today. Governor, welcome.
Happy to be with you, Dan.
So, Governor, let me ask you, we see you all over the place. See you're doing your PSAs, and every place you turn, you see Governor Chris Christie out there. So let me ask you, what have you been up to besides what we see on TV?
Well, Dan, thanks for having me. As you know, over the last 3 years, I've been a legal and political commentator for ABC News. That's been very busy given everything that's gone on in these last 3 years in our country. And I've enjoyed having that platform and doing that. I also am sitting on 4 different corporate boards. I have my own consulting company, and I do some paid public speaking as well. My wife and I run a nonprofit that's supported businesses that have been really hurt by the COVID crisis. It's called the New Jersey 30-Day Fund, and we've helped save over 300 businesses and raised $1 million, donated the first 100,000 ourselves. And then lastly, I run a public policy institute called the Christie Institute for Public Policy, which is looking for bipartisan solutions to the nation's problems. So beside that, I'm not doing anything.
Governor, it's great having you on with us. I am curious, though. You were one of the first, right after the incident from last week, to really come out and give your opinion on it and really talk about the president's role within the incident as well. And so I'm curious, as someone who is so close to the administration over the years, have you talked to the president or anybody at the administration since then?
Well, I've spoken to some right after the president since last Wednesday. Now, I tried to call him last Wednesday when all of that stuff was going on, that he tried to tell it out there and be assertive and demand that those people who were supporters of his get off the Capitol and get away and let Congress do their work. I wasn't able to get through to him, and I have not spoken to him since. But, the fact is that we've been friends for 20 years, and our friendship has never been based on one or the other of us telling the other guy exactly what they want to hear, but it's been telling them the truth. And so I'm sure he's not very happy with me at the moment. I'm confident of that. I haven't spoken to him, knowing him as I do. But I also know that over the course of the 20 years, we've had plenty of disagreements on things. And we get back to being friends, and I'm confident that'll happen.
Governor, you mentioned it, and something I've always appreciated about you is watching you throughout your political career has been your willingness to say what needs to be said, not necessarily just what's politically correct or maybe what the echo chamber wants us to say. As a nation, though, we seem to be getting further and further away from this, and that anybody who steps outside of their so-called zone gets called out. I know for me, as a conservative, if I say anything against the administration, I'm quickly taken to task, harder by people on the right than I am on the left when I take the left to task. So just as a nation, I want to get your opinion on this. How do we get past this, and can we?
Well, I think we can, because we've done it before, and we have to listen to each other. Maybe a little less talking and a little more listening might be helpful. And I've always found that I learn a lot more from listening than I do from talking. And I think as a country, especially after what we saw on January 6th, I think we now know starker than ever that our divisions right now in this country on substantive issues are deep. But there's much more that unites us as Americans than divide us. And we need to be talking about those things as well and trying to build towards some type of common understanding. Now, listen, our country was designed to be an argument. The founders designed it to be an argument. And I have no problem with arguing. It's when arguing this summer regarding social justice turned into violence and rioting and looting. And when that argument, as it did on January 6th, turns into violence and rioting and looting and mayhem. On both sides of the aisle, that's wrong. The Democrats didn't do enough to condemn that this summer. And I certainly was not going to be a hypocrite about it. And so if I was going to be critical of that this summer, you can be sure that I had to be critical of it, and also had to point the finger of blame where it belongs, at least in part, which is at the President of the United States. Because, For the last 9 weeks, he's been telling people he's going to prove this was a fraud and that the election was stolen from him. He has not, but he's continued to say it. And that's part of what drove those people to the point they were when they stormed the Capitol on January 6th.
Governor, if you don't mind, I'd like to shift a little bit here and talk about the pandemic. Now, of course, you had unfortunately contracted COVID-19, and thankfully you were able to recover. And what we're seeing right now, throughout 2020 and now into 2021, is that each state seems to be running things differently. Who's shut down, who's opened up, and what is the right answer? It's very, very difficult. And I wanted to ask you, based upon what we see right now, would we have been better served if we had this handled more centralized, let's say, and had the federal government take the lead as opposed to the individual states?
Well, I've always felt that in a moment of national crisis, which this is, that the national government should lead the conversation. Now, that doesn't mean they have to do all of it. They have to coordinate with the nation's governors and mayors to make sure that everybody has a voice in it and then that they can play a part in helping to execute the plan. But I do think that we would have been a little bit better off in this country if there had been some at least consistent messaging from the White House. You mentioned I got COVID, and I had worn a mask whenever I went outdoors for 7 months. And then for those 4 days that I was in the White House, thinking that I was in a safe space because everyone was getting tested, I took that mask off and I got sick. It seems to me that we should be able to interact with each other, not going to, big arenas or big stadiums and filling them up, but going out to restaurants, going out to stores, going out and doing the things that we need to do to help to run our businesses and our families if everyone takes the precautions that are needed. And I think that's where we missed it. The president missed it by not wearing a mask right from the beginning, not necessarily because he was at risk, although we know he caught COVID as well, but more importantly, because he would be setting an example for the American people that was a positive and constructive one from a public health perspective.
And Governor, we see right now, and I know you're friends with him, Governor Cuomo over in New York, and he's now talking about the need to open up the economy in his state, and I personally agree with that. But and I know it's easy to Monday morning quarterback this thing, but I know you're not the type to just sit back and criticize. However, if you were the governor of New Jersey during this pandemic, what would you have done differently than, let's say, what has been done to this point?
I would have closed sooner and I would have reopened sooner. And I would not have done anything with schools. Those are the three things that I would have done differently. The fact is that our students are being hammered with remote learning. It just is not as effective. It doesn't fulfill the constitutional requirement, in my view, in New Jersey, of every child having a thorough and efficient education. And to me, we should have closed sooner, right in March, for a period of time, gotten everybody acclimated, and then began to slowly open up, but use the time we were closed to teach people what you had to do to stay safe, to teach them that mask wearing was not optional, but vitally important, to teach them about multiple hand washing, to teach them about cleaning surfaces, to teach them about social distancing and not having big crews at your home. We just had our immediate family at Thanksgiving and Christmas this year. And, while it was a little bit lonely and a little bit strange, nobody got sick. And we didn't get anybody else sick. So I think if I had been running things in New Jersey, I would have closed it faster, reopened it faster, and allowed the schools to continue to run, because the education of our children is vitally important. And what we've learned from COVID is it very, very rarely has long-term deleterious effects on children.
Governor, as we look at the business climate, outside post-COVID, just in the last week, we've seen this movement, and we talked about cancel culture just a second ago, but we've seen that now seem to be making its ugly way into the business sector of America, with organizations like Amazon, for example, shutting off Parler, and Twitter and Facebook even engaging in this. I'm curious because now in your business role, sometimes you're advising businesses. What advice are you giving to whether it be a large corporation or a small business now that's looking at the idea of dipping their toe into the political sphere on whether or not that's a good idea, and how do they navigate those waters?
Well, listen, I think that what's happening with Twitter and Facebook and Amazon and Google is extremely dangerous for this country. Now, listen, I've said a lot over the last 4 years that I haven't liked or thought that many of the president's tweets were constructive and helpful. But he's the absolute right to express that. And the idea that the Ayatollah Khamenei has a Twitter page, but Donald Trump does not, shows you the level of hypocrisy. He's ordering the murder of innocent Iranians every week, yet he is allowed to tweet and mock the United States on his Twitter page, but Donald Trump is not allowed to. I think this takes us down a very slippery slope. I don't want Jack Dorsey deciding who's worthy of being able to speak out under the First Amendment. And I'll tell you something else. This 230 liability shield they have now definitively has to go, because it's all based on the fact that they wouldn't edit what was on their sites. So how could they be held responsible for it? Well, they're editing now. So they need to get that liability shield away and have them held responsible for what gets put on their sites.
You mentioned Section 230, and I think that one of the things that we all saw if we watched the markets this week was that Twitter and Facebook and even Google and in some ways Amazon all broke the cardinal rule of business, which is don't upset your investors. We saw literally over $100 billion of market cap lost this week once they engaged in their, we'll call it cancel culture approach. But you mentioned Section 230, and just candidly, do you think that it will get revoked now that Democrats hold the Senate and the House of Representatives and the White House? And it seems that these big tech companies were maybe playing their odds to favor Democrats over the last few weeks.
Sure. I mean, I don't think you can draw any other conclusion when the Ayatollah is still up and Donald Trump is down. I think that a lot of these folks who run these companies were upset with Donald Trump for a long time and were waiting for an excuse, waiting for a reason to shut him down. And his conduct over the last 9 weeks, culminating in the riot on January 6th, gave them the excuse. But we should not stand for it. This is not about defending just the president. This is defending everybody on that service, and Facebook and Parler and TikTok and Triller. All these places need to be a forum for the First Amendment, a forum for free expression. And I don't think if they're not going to edit everybody, they just shouldn't edit some people.
Governor, when you think about it, anytime someone is going to do a search on the internet, where do they go? They go to Google. And it's come down to over 90% of people that are searching for information are getting it through Google. So think about how powerful it is that Google gets to basically filter the answers that people are looking for. So with that kind of power, and it's not just Google, of course, it's also Facebook and the other big tech, Apple as well. Should these companies be broken up at this point? Because clearly it seems like there's a monopoly.
Well, listen, there's no question that when the Justice Department brings antitrust suits, there's a real concern that they're violating current antitrust laws, and that needs to be looked at very carefully, Dan. I'm not somebody who believes necessarily in breaking up spontaneously created American corporations, because I think it's one of the things that makes us great in this country is the freedom to start your own business, grow your own business, buy other businesses once you get big enough. But you got to do so consistent with the law. And I think that the Justice Department has shown some real guts for bringing these cases, because you can imagine that with the money these folks have at their disposal, they will be getting the platinum-plated defense. But I will tell you, I think there's real concerns there, and they wouldn't be paying those high-priced lawyers if they didn't agree.
Yeah, you're right. So, Governor, also, let me ask you another question related to the national debt and, of course, these deficits that were continually running up. Now, at one point in time, the Republican Party used to be the voice of reason when it came to fiscal responsibility. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that both parties have done a terrible job managing our country's finances, and that even goes beyond just our country. It's on the state levels as well. So my question for you relates to: do you believe that we should have a balanced budget requirement at the federal level?
Well, yeah, I do, with a phase in, because obviously we got a lot of work to do before we can actually balance that budget. But with a phase in, I think it makes absolute sense. The states do it, and the states do it because they can't print their own money, right? Federal government always has the option of printing their money. There should be a balanced budget amendment, with exceptions like for things like war and pandemic and the kind of things that only a national government can respond to. But other than that, I don't see why the president should be held to a different standard than all 50 governors are held to.
Governor, recently Bitcoin has become all the rage, and watching its volatility has been somewhat like thinking I'm at the blackjack table in Las Vegas. But I'm curious as to what you would say to those who are calling for a decentralized currency that's not backed by the dollar or gold.
Wow, I think that question is one that, for me at least, I think it's a very kind of dangerous area. Now, of course, my children would tell me that I'm acting like a grandpa when I say things like that. The same way I don't have a Venmo account. They tell me I'm living in the 20th century. But then I go, I did live in the 20th century. What are you talking about? But I think, listen, I think Bitcoin and that type of currency is going to come. Whether its time is truly now as an alternative, I have some doubts, and I think there has to be a lot more government examination and potentially regulation of what they're doing. But there's no doubt that the Gen Xers and the Gen Zs, they think it's the greatest thing in the world. So it could be just a product of my age, that I don't feel as enthusiastic as they do about it, or it could be that that age gives me wisdom and wants to make sure that we don't cut any corners and bring them into prominence.
Hey, Governor, I just want to ask you a question about divided government, and of course, those are two different things. Now, of course, when you were governor of the state of New Jersey and being a Republican, you were able to find a way to get things done. You were able to cross the aisle and understood that you had to get along with the other side, otherwise absolutely nothing would get done. It seems as if in Washington, either you have control of all three or nothing gets done. So I would ask you, what could be done in Washington, D.C., based upon what you did in New Jersey, to be able to get the sides working together so we can do something for the American people?
First thing is you have to develop relationships with the people that you have to deal with. When I was governor, and there would be nights at 10:30, 11 o'clock, my cell phone would ring. And if it wasn't some type of state emergency, it was almost always the Senate president, who's a Democrat named Steve Sweeney. And my wife would say to me, do you really have to answer that? I mean, for God's sakes, it's 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. And I said, yeah, I have to. Because you have to develop a relationship. And the reason is, Dan, it becomes a lot harder to hate up close.
Governor,
The closer you are, the sooner you can develop a relationship and a trusting relationship that then allows you to make deals. And that's what we really need to be doing. And we don't do that in Washington anymore. And quite frankly, over the last number of years, the second Obama term and the one term of Donald Trump, I don't think that the executives have had a great deal of interest in putting in the work that was necessary to be able to develop relationships across the aisle.
Okay. From your lips to Washington's ears, Governor, I hope they hear that and heed it. Listen, as we're wrapping up, I know you're a busy guy, you got a lot of places to go, but I got to ask you, as a football fan like Dan and myself, but as a Cowboys fan like me, how are they going to do next year? They got a chance, maybe a two-part question. They got a chance in second. Is Jerry Jones hiring Christie 55 and getting some advice from you guys on their next season?
First off, the Cowboys will do better next year because they'll have their quarterback back. And this is a quarterback league. Everybody knows it. If your quarterback isn't there, you have a much diminished chance of being a winning football team. We have a new defensive coordinator, thank God. Our defense was the worst in the NFL this year, and the personnel's not the worst. And so I think we will be better next year. And I am always been and proud to be an informal consultant to Mr. Jones. Speak frequently. He never has to hire me for my advice like any other fan. If they had the access to Mr. Jones that I do, they'd be giving him advice all the time. So I'm happy to advise Jerry whenever we speak. And what he knows for sure is if you're the governor of New Jersey, surrounded by Eagles fans on the south and Giants fans on the north, and you still root for your Cowboys, then you know he knows you're a real Cowboys fan. Whatever advice I give him, it's coming
Yeah,
from the
listen,
heart.
that advice, I'm hurling at him every Sunday through my television as well. So I certainly understand that. By the way, how did you get elected governor twice in New Jersey being a Cowboys fan?
Charming good looks, baby.
I love it.
Isn't it obvious, Seth? How could you ask a question like that?
I love it.
So, Governor, to wrap things up, here's the question. What is next for Chris Christie? I mean, do we get out the Christie 2024 buttons and bumper stickers at this point?
Dan, we don't get them out, right? Because it's 4 years away. And, there's an old Yiddish saying called men plan, God laughs. And so life is an amazing journey. I'm not ready to retire yet, Dan, and I'm certainly not ready to retire yet from public life. So let's see what the next couple of years brings. I'm going to continue to be a voice on the public scene, on the issues that really matter and are important. I'm going to continue to contribute in ways I can to not only the betterment of my state, but the betterment of my country. And if it turns out that we turn the clock in 2022 into 2023, and I feel like I have things to say that will be helpful to the country and skills that they need, I wouldn't hesitate to run because I think it's the highest calling you can have is to be president of the United States. So we certainly haven't discounted it, but we're not making any announcements today with you and Seth.
I was hoping you'd break it on the BizPo show, but we'll just have to wait. But when you get to that point,
yeah,
when you get to that point, Governor, we got to have you back.
Absolutely. Now, Dan, listen, I only did it for you as a favor, but now that I know that Seth's a Cowboys fan, there's every reason to come on now.
Excellent. Maybe we'll record these on Sundays from now on.
Exactly. Listen, this year would have been better if we recorded them during the game, Seth, so we'd have to watch.
This is true.
Well, Governor, we can't thank you enough, and you are always welcome at the BizPo show. So thank you, Governor.
Dan, Seth, thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to be on your program.
Thanks, Governor. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the BizPo show. Dan, man, I got to tell you, we set the bar pretty high with our first interview being with Governor Chris Christie. That was fantastic, wasn't it?
He's really unbelievable. What a guest and what a personality, and he's a smart guy. Obviously, being from New Jersey, we're used to Chris Christie. He's really one of us, and I think, Seth, you and I are friends, and we interact all the time, but you really got a dose of New Jersey right there.
I did.
Unbelievable.
I did indeed, and I've always been a fan of Governor Christie's and always appreciated his style of not pulling any punches. That's the way that we try to do things down here in Texas too. So I was glad to hear him give the opinions that he gives. He's not abashed about them, and that's what I like about him most. I wish more of our politicians would just tell it like it is, tell it like they see it, call balls and strikes, so to speak, and certainly Governor Christie did there.
And he's always been that way. I don't know if you remember when he first became governor of New Jersey, he was this, such a breath of fresh air. Nobody had seen anything like that before. He's insulting the press, and, he was kind of doing things long before Trump was. And he was great at it. And there, Governor Christie's got that edge to him, but I always felt he wasn't mean. He just said, look, this is how it is. Although he did call some people some names along the way, but I got to tell you, they probably deserved it.
Well, listen, I hope that if nothing else, as people listen to this, and specifically as people on either side of the aisle listen to this, they listen to some of the things that he said there about, civility and coming together and listening to one another. I think that's going to be really impactful. Well, will we see it? I don't know if we'll see it or not, but we are at a place where we've got this new administration coming in. The politics in D.C. are changing. The winds are blowing a different direction. And so as we kind of tie this back into the business realm, and I know that Governor Christie gave some important points there, I thought, on the business sector as well. But Dan, what's your take? What do you think is going to be changing in the business climate in the days and weeks and even years to come?
Well, I think what we're going to see, Seth, is at least an attempt at a lot more regulations, and we're certainly going to see an attempt at changes in the tax code. Now, of course, being America's accountant, I'm always really paying attention to what happens in the tax code, but it's really more than that. It's not about being an accountant. The tax code makes people do things and not do things. Many times it's been said that the tax code picks winners and losers. So it's going to be interesting to see, as changes are going to be proposed, who the winners and who the losers are going to be. Now, let's not make the assumption just because you have a Democrat in the White House, you have a Democrat-controlled House, and you have a split, but presumably controlled by the Democrats as well in the Senate, that Joe Biden is going to get everything he wants. He's not going to get everything he wants. I think directionally he's going to get what he wants. In terms of, are taxes going down? No, they're going to go up. Now, what taxes and how much? That remains to be seen. But there's some signaling here, Seth, and why do I say that? Well, he's putting Bernie Sanders in charge of the budgetary committee. Now, to me, that's a big statement he's making. Where's he taking us there?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's something I want to add to that, though, is if we can always look to history to try to see what might come ahead. And for those that don't remember and maybe have been stuck in their echo chamber for a little while, listen, when George W. Bush came into power, he, for a period of his presidency, through the Republican Party, had control of both the House and the Senate. Now, he had 9/11 to contend with, and so that changed, I think, the trajectory of maybe some of the domestic policy that he would have wanted to do. But when Barack Obama came into power in 2008, he too had the Senate and the House of Representatives. And in that time, they were really only able to pass one major piece of legislation. Now, it was a doozy. It was the Affordable Care Act, and it's something we're still contending with today. But it was only one piece of legislation. At the end of the day, our healthcare system is still intact. Our health insurance system is intact. While many, and myself included, didn't love the law and certainly would have rather seen something different in there, it wasn't the end of the world. And then fast forward in 2016 when President Trump took office, guess what? Just like Joe Biden will, he had control of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And he had more control than Joe Biden will because he had more members. And guess what he was able to get done? One key thing, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so, as you alluded to just a moment ago, I think that for those conservatives that are sitting on the edge of the cliff thinking, oh my gosh, we're about to see this radical shift, my encouragement to them is to say that our founders were really smart when they created our system of government to ensure that we didn't see massive pendulum swings. And the other piece of that is, don't forget there are somewhat moderate Democrats in the Senate, like Joe Manchin out of West Virginia and Kristen Sinema out of Arizona, who have already come out, Joe Manchin, as a matter of fact, saying, I'm not going to support liberal policies. Matter of fact, he came out, I think, over the last week and said he's not going to support the $2,000 stimulus package. And so I think that there are those checks and balances in place. And will we likely see something major from a Biden administration in the early days of his first term? Yes. Will we see massive change? I don't think so.
I think the Biden administration is going to end up spending a lot of time related to COVID and the vaccination effort. And quite frankly, that's where it needs to be. We need to get people vaccinations. We need to, because without that, Seth, we can't get these states' economies reopened and get our nation moving in the right direction again. And I think that's always been the case. Obviously, you and I have had discussions about this, saying, hey, we got to open up these states and figure out how to keep economies growing or certainly not shrinking, and at the same time trying to contain the virus. Now, I know it's not easy, but from what we're learning, the states that have completely shut down are not experiencing better rates in terms of COVID occurrences and COVID deaths than states that have remained open. So you shut everything down and you pay a huge economic price for that. And then you're not getting the desired results in terms of protecting people from the virus. So I really think that the Biden administration should, and I think they will, focus a lot of attention on what happens with the pandemic. But that's, I'm gonna say, Seth, that in a year from now we're going to be past that, and that's still going to leave another legislative year for Biden to do something big, because presumably it will be hard for him to be able to control both houses after the next midterm.
So you mentioned it just a second ago, right? You've got Bernie Sanders, who has been pinned, it looks like, to head the Budgetary Committee. Here we have a Democratic socialist going to be controlling the budget, which is already in massive deficit. So just opinion, I'm curious as to your thoughts. Do we see them take up legislation like we teased at the top of the show, where maybe we have free college? Or do they take on maybe a Medicare for all, or even a Biden care where there's a public option? I tend to think that they probably go after health care. I think that's the bigger thing, especially on the following days of a pandemic. But to that point, I think you get one. Do you go for free college like AOC and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders won, or do you go for public health care option?
I think you go. I think he goes healthcare, given all the options. I think he'll make some progress in those areas as far as what his agenda will be. But remember, he was part of Obamacare, and Obamacare has been whittled away over time, and it's really a shell of itself. I think he will try to restore that. The question becomes this, Seth, and when we're making reference to how much you can get done, legislating is hard, right? And there's a lot of horse trading, and it's also about political capital. How much political capital does Joe Biden have? Barack Obama used all the political capital he had on the Affordable Care Act. He wanted it, and he was willing to stake his entire presidency on it, and that's what he did. I don't see Joe Biden that passionate about anything. So I think that's what makes it hard to figure out what's he going to go after. But I do think he will try to save Obamacare for sure.
It'll certainly be interesting, and a journey that we'll all be on together over the next coming years, and certainly we'll be here to chime in and give our thoughts. Hey, when we come back, Dan and I will give you our final thoughts. Welcome back to the BizPo Show. Each week, Dan and I will wrap up the show with a segment we'll call Final Thoughts. Dan and I will both pick a topic that's found its way to the forefront of our minds and give our personal thoughts on the subject. Perhaps we'll talk about things that are on your mind too, and maybe you'll agree or disagree. Either way, that's okay. So Dan, what's your final thought this week?
Seth, with everything that's happened in the Capitol over the last week or so, it made me think back to a conversation I was having with a local politician, and we were actually discussing the results of a very hard-fought election. And sometimes elections don't go your way, and he gave me some very sage advice. He said, I look at an election like you're participating in sports, in a game, and you go out there and you try as hard as you can to win. But sometimes it doesn't go your way, and that's okay, because you did the best you can. You shake hands with your opponent, you hold your head high, and you walk away. Now, I know a lot of people right now are extremely disappointed with what's happened with the election, but it's more disappointing as to how people have reacted. I know they're upset, but that's no way for us as Americans to conduct ourselves. We can do better. So let's reach across the aisle. Let's shake hands. We're all Americans, and let's do what's best for our nation.
Dan, that's a great final thought, and in reality, that's what's on my mind too. For my final thought this week, I want to reiterate something that Governor Christie said just moments ago, and that's our need as a nation to listen to one another. And if I could steal something I've heard Congressman Dan Crenshaw of Texas say, maybe let's all try hard not to offend, but just a little bit harder not to be offended. Listen, very soon we'll be seeing a new administration in the White House and new leadership in the Senate. And I can already hear conservatives lining up with their shots of how the GOP and Trump has been treated over the past 4 years. And while certainly there's merit to that argument, can we just for a moment put down our yeah, but responses? It seems like every few years new politicians are coming into power and want to talk about unity. But you know where unity really starts? Right here. Unity doesn't mean agreement, but disagreement doesn't mean hatred. We're coming off of a year that's known a lot of heartache, and while there are many lessons to be learned from the impact of the coronavirus, one that was very clear is that the virus itself, it didn't care if its victims were Republicans or Democrats. If COVID didn't care, why should we? Let's start looking at our fellow Americans as that, Americans. Let's talk through our disagreements, but listen to the other side when they are talking. In the end, we may not agree, but we maybe just might have a little bit more of an understanding as to why they feel the way they feel about whatever it is that we disagree on. And isn't that what our union should be all about? I remember in the days following 9/11, we all put down our political affiliations and put on the flag. As we kick off 2021, I hope that we can do that once again. But it starts with you, and it starts with me. Well, that does it for this week's edition of the BizPo Show. We hope you enjoyed it and certainly appreciate your tuning in. Our thanks to Governor Chris Christie for being our guest, and we want to thank you, too, for being part of the show as well. We hope that you'll tell your friends about us, and be sure to tune in again next week. From Dallas, Texas, I'm Seth Denson.
And from New York City, I'm Dan Geltrude. Good night.